Hello, lovely people. I've managed to make time to go into the sewing cave. I don't have a lot of time. I think I've got 30, 45 minutes tops. I haven't yet decided what buttons I'm going to use, so I'm not going to do the buttonholes today. What I am going to do though is I'm going to prepare the sleeves. So we're going to sew up the sleeves so that they're ready for easing once we get back to that situation. So that's a finite task that I know I'll be able to complete as we sew along with this BURDA 10 20 20 number 120 dress. Also, my sewing cave right now, it is a complete mess. I haven't had time to clean or tidy it up. So, bear with the mess that you see. But I'm just going to show you what the sleeve looks like and the sleeve pattern pieces that we're going to need. Hopefully, we'll have enough time to do the cuffs as well, because I tend to prefer to do the whole sleeve with the cuff and then I will attach it.
Here we go. This is the sleeve, and it's got an incredibly high sleeve head because this is a very fitted sleeve. You don't have as much movement. This dress was not designed for you to be doing yoga or to be doing aerobics or lifting your arms up in any form. This was not designed for that. This was designed for you to be going to a cocktail party where, you're only raising your hand to drink that, glass of champagne or glass of red wine or martini. So and you can tell because this is a mountain. It's not a hill, it's a mountain. Key things to note: you need your points here for the easing, and you need to notch your shoulder points. This shows you where the front is. And the other thing that we have are the cuff pattern pieces, right? You need an uninterfaced one and an interfaced one. The cuffs are extra wide, so very nice and very elegant. The other thing that you need on here is this line here where your vent is going to go. Your placket is going to go here, so make sure you mark those. And I've transferred the line over using my erasable friction pen, but you also want to make sure that you've got the notch over here. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put in the basting stitches so that we'll be able to ease this sleeve cap in. My first line of basting stitch is going to be 1/4 of an inch in, and then my second line will be 5/8 of an inch. My sewing seam line is going to be 1/2 an inch, so we're going to have the basting stitches either side of the seam line. And that's the best way to try and ensure that you get a nicely set in sleeve that doesn't look like it's been gathered, because the last thing you want is for it to look like it's been gathered too much. Of course, you will get some pucks here and there, but for the most part, you want those to be in the minority. You want most of it to be set in properly. Okay, this is what we have here, and we're just going to leave that for now because this is for when we actually go to sew the sleeve to the armhole, which is the final stage for the sleeve itself. But it is a lot easier to actually do the basting stitches now before you create the tube that is the sleeve. So whenever I'm sewing a sleeve, the first thing that I will do with the sleeve is just to do the basting stitches for easing in. But the next thing that we're going to do that's easy to do when the sleeve is flat is we're going to get that placket opened up. So I'm going to do what's called a bound opening on here. And the first thing to do is that I'm going to stitch a row of stitches around this line as close as possible to the line so that I'll be able to cut into it, and the rest of the fabric is protected by my machine stitching. Okay, this is what it looks like here. So you can see it's almost like you do a very narrow V, but the idea is that when you cut into this section here, then your fabric on this side isn't going to stretch out. And this is particularly important if you're working with finer fabrics. If I was working with something more stable like a cotton poplin or a cotton lawn, I wouldn't do this. I would just cut straight into it and then I'll just sew my bias binding straight. But this Moroccan crepe has got a fair bit of stretch to it and it's quite lightweight. Okay? So I'm going to slash between Okay, and you want to cut right up to the point, but not through your stitching. And there we go. And so because this has been stitched, it's not going to stretch out. Okay, so we're going to take the bias binding and we're going to sew it. Bias binding is refusing to separate. We're going to sew it along here, and when we get to this point, we'll pivot and make it go straight. See if I can show you what that will look like on the machine.
The idea is that the bias binding is going to go along here, and then we'll pivot here and we'll make it go straight. So, and I'm using just under a 1/4 inch seam allowance to sew my bias strip on.
Okay, so the next thing is we're going to press this under like so. When you sew your bias strip, you have to make sure that you're sewing it. This is the right side. So you're going to do this onto the right side. Okay, so you're going to wrap the bias strip under. So I'm only working with a 1/4 inch seam allowances, so very, very tiny. And then you're going to wrap it like so and press it. You can use pins if you want to hold it in place. Okay, so when you've pressed it, it should make it easier then to stitch it. So now I'm going to go take this over the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch it just along the edge of that bias binding, but it's been wrapped over now. This is what it would look like, and you're going to sew it right up edge, stitching along that bias binding fold. When you come to doing your pivoting point, you really want to stretch out that bias binding whilst you're also smoothing this. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like from the right side, and this is what it will look like from the wrong side. So you've got the bias binding and it's wrapped it up, and you can see how you sort of have a straight line over there. Okay, and then what we'll do on here is when we fold this down, you're going to sew a slanted line of stitching. You're going to sew a slanted line of stitching right here, just like so, and that will create your bound opening for the cuffs. Okay, so there we go, and we're just going to do a slanted one. I'm going to go forwards and backwards and forwards again just to reinforce that. Once it's been pressed, you kind of get this. So you have this one which goes sort of under like that, and there you go. You've got a bound opening. We've got a little bit of a tuck here. Sometimes I get a tuck, sometimes I don't get a tuck, but I've never found this to be an issue. It can just kind of look like a design feature. Right, so now that we've got that sorted, the next thing is to now do the sleeve seam itself, the under sleeve seam. Okay, so seam has been sewn, overlocked and pressed. Now we're going to do some gathering stitches along this here where the cuff is going to get attached. So we're going to just do 2 rows of gathering stitches. Okay, gathering stitches are done. Now I'll move on to the cuff pieces. Okay, an important point to note with the cuff pieces, because these are drafted yourself pieces, they include a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. But if you remember, I've done everything else, the traced pattern pieces, using my 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I could make the adjustment, but for these ones, I'm just going to sew them at 5/8 inch seam allowance because that's what they were drafted as. And if I use the 5/8 inch seam allowance, it will make them fit the sleeve hole. It will fit the sleeve appropriately. So just always remember that with the draft it yourself pattern pieces, they use a 5/8 inch, and it's fine if you add 5/8 inch seam allowance, you're fine. But if you use a smaller one like I do, you just always need to be mindful of that. First step with the cuffs is that I'm going to turn under a seam allowance of 5/8 inch along one of the long sides. That's what that looks like. Okay, then you're gonna trim off the corners and trim down the sides. We're going to turn this right side out. Up. A little bit closer. Lovely looking cuff ready to go onto the sleeve. Okay, so I'll start off by grabbing my wonder clips over here and I'm gonna clip on this side clipping on the ends first before I start doing the gathering. Sounds like an Outlander thing. Right, here we go. Use my wonder clips there. Let's do a bit more gathering on this side. Happens to me, always a little mistake here and there. Okay, there we go. Oh, wow! Would you look at that? Right, off to the sewing machine now. So we're just going to sew down the gathers and then we'll press them into the cuff and then we'll do some hand sewing to finish it off. Okay, so that's been done. Got a lot of gathering, a lot of poofiness over here. Woohoo! Cannot wait. Cannot wait. But there we go. So I'm gonna press the gathering in like so, and then I'm gonna do some sewing. So there's a lot of bulk here. It's a huge amount of bulk, so I'll need to do some grading. I'm going to have to grade this down and possibly snip off the snip some of the gathering, and then I'll do some hands. We have the beginnings of a sleeve here, and oh, it's got a lot of volume. Look at that cuff over there. Got all that volume. I am going to stop here for now, but we've got sleeves that are good to go onto the bodice. I will do the hand sewing. I'm going to take these downstairs with me to do the hand sewing. But yeah, we'll stop there for now, and next time we'll pick up with attaching these to the bodice and attaching the skirt to the bodice, and hopefully by then I'll have chosen some buttons and I'll have done the buttonholes as well.
Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. And I know I haven't been able to keep on schedule, especially with doing Vlogmas and with all of the stuff that's going on at Christmas. But we are getting there slowly but slowly. This is the first chance I've had to be in the sewing cave. I hope that you're finding the videos informative, useful, and entertaining. And if you are, please do give the video a big thumbs up. It really helps the channel. It helps the algorithm with YouTube. And if you haven't already, do consider subscribing. Again, it helps the channel and it does mean that you'll be alerted whenever I post out anything new that is sewing related. And I do tend to put out a lot of sewing related stuff, and I just like to share my journey and my passions within sewing. And it can be a lot of stuff to do with sewing machines or sewing patterns, sewing magazines, looking after garments, just basically sewing. I'm crazy about sewing and I just like to share whatever is going on in my sewing world. So do consider subscribing. If you are already subscribed, thank you so much. I appreciate you. I appreciate all of the comments that you leave. I do eventually get round to responding to every single comment. So yeah, until I see you next time, guys, happy sewing. Bye.